Have you ever stopped to wonder why you do things you don't remember choosing? Why your hand reaches for the phone before you even realize you're lonely? Why you smile in places that make you uncomfortable or stay quiet when everything inside you wants to speak? It all feels like choice, but beneath that feeling lies something deeper. Something older than logic, quieter than thought, yet far more powerful. It's the unseen force shaping your life, the subconscious. It's the part of you that keeps breathing when you forget to, that pulls your hand away before danger registers. It stores every glance, every rejection, every signal of comfort or threat. Like a river moving beneath frozen ground, it guides your actions while your conscious mind walks above, convinced it's in charge. You believe you're deciding who to love, what to fear, and how to live. But in truth, many of those choices were set in motion long before you could name them. A pianist's fingers move before their mind processes the notes. A driver arrives home without recalling the route. The body knows the way because the mind beneath the mind is leading. This is the paradox of being human. You are both the captain and the current. You steer the wheel, yet something unseen draws the map. Neuroscientists estimate that as much as 95% of your daily behavior happens automatically, driven not by conscious thought but by patterns of memory, emotion and habit stored deep within the brain. It's remarkable to realize that most of who you are was never deliberately chosen. Imagine walking through a garden you didn't plant, every flower a memory, every thorn a fear. You can trim the surface, but the roots remain beyond your reach. This is where the subconscious resides, not as an enemy, but as the keeper of everything you've ever felt. It remembers what protected you and what caused pain, then builds the rules of your life around those experiences. It doesn't seek happiness or achievement, it seeks safety. That's why you repeat familiar patterns even when they hurt. You're drawn to people who reflect your past, and you avoid risks that challenge your sense of security. The subconscious whispers, better the pain you know than the danger you can't predict. And the conscious mind agrees, believing it's made a rational decision. Yet beneath every thought and action, the subconscious remains vast, ancient, and unfinished. It is both protector and shadow, shaping the structure of your every moment. You may think you're steering your life, but perhaps you're only holding the wheel while something deeper directs the course. And if most of who you are lives in silence, then who or what is truly driving you? Before you ever learned to think, you were already learning to feel. Long before you spoke your first word, the world had already begun shaping you, not through language, but through tone, rhythm, and silence. A lingering glance, a sigh that carried disappointment, a smile that offered safety for a brief moment. Your subconscious witnessed it all, absorbing and constructing the invisible framework of who you would one day become. Picture a child sitting in a dimly lit room, holding a toy for comfort. The air feels heavy, filled not with words, but with their weight unspoken. The mother's voice is sharper today. Her movements are hurried, her gaze distant. The child learns something vital, not through explanation, but through energy. Love can disappear without warning. That realization doesn't fade when silence returns. It sinks deeper, settling permanently in the subconscious. Years later, that same child, now grown, might hesitate before showing joy, fearing it could lead to rejection or may overcompensate, constantly pleasing others to preserve peace. Psychologists call this attachment conditioning. In early development, the brain learns to link love with survival. Neural connections strengthen with each repeated experience. A raised voice becomes danger. A soft touch, safety. Research on childhood development shows that by around age 7, the subconscious mind has already absorbed most of its core beliefs, not about the world itself, but about one's place in it. Were you safe? Were you seen? Did your emotions matter? Each answer carved lasting patterns that still guide your adult life. A boy who's praised only when quiet grows into a man afraid to speak. A girl who earns love by being perfect becomes a woman who equates exhaustion with value. These are not conscious decisions, they are echoes. The subconscious, loyal to your survival, keeps repeating what once kept you protected. It doesn't realize time has moved on, that you've grown, that the old threats no longer exist. To your subconscious, you're still that child in the dimly lit room, reading love like weather, watching faces for signs of warmth, reshaping yourself to avoid emotional storms. The philosopher Alan Watts once said, "We seldom realize that our most private thoughts and emotions are not actually our own." He was right. They were shaped by whispers, footsteps, and the way your name was spoken, with kindness or with anger. Every hesitation, fear, or desire in adulthood is an old lesson repeating itself. You are a reflection of countless invisible teachings, written not in words but in emotion. The subconscious never forgets its first language, feeling, and it still speaks through you, guiding your reactions and guarding you from ghosts that no longer exist. But what happens when the child's survival rules begin to imprison the adult? That's when the mask forms, marking the next chapter of the mind's hidden story. You grow up believing you've escaped the past, that logic, goals, and discipline have replaced it. Yet beneath those layers, something softer remains. The child you once were never vanished. It simply learned to hide behind a new disguise. You call it maturity, responsibility, ambition. But often, it's just protection shaped into identity. You wear it well. At work, it looks like control, ambition, or the need to be indispensable. In relationships, it appears as caution, smiling through discomfort, saying you're fine when you're not. The subconscious doesn't trust the world with your truth, because once, your truth wasn't accepted. So it builds armor made of habits. The people pleaser who can't refuse, the perfectionist who only feels safe when overworked, the skeptic who keeps distance because trust once caused pain. These masks aren't falsehoods. They're unfinished survival stories. Neuroscientists remind us that most of our decisions are made before we consciously realize them. The brain, faithful to its past, still activates the same pathways built long ago in childhood. Familiarity often feels like safety, even when it causes pain. That's why people keep repeating the same patterns, the same kinds of love, the same arguments, the same quiet sense of being unseen. Because when pain is repeated long enough, it starts to feel like home. You might think you're searching for happiness, but the subconscious only looks for what it already knows. Imagine yourself as a puppet wrapped in golden strings. You move gracefully, perform skillfully, and believe you're free. Yet unseen hands still guide your movements. Those strings are woven from old fears, learned expectations, and unspoken promises made long ago. Promises like, I will never be a burden, I will never be weak, I will never ask for too much. The mask you wear keeps you functioning, respected, even loved, but it also distances you from your true self. You smile not because joy fills you, but because smiling once protected you. You push forward not out of passion, but because slowing down feels unsafe. Philosophers call this the tragedy of self-forgetting, when the person you've become is only an echo of who you needed to be. In that state, control becomes your armor. You try to manage every detail because you still remember the chaos you once couldn't. But the tighter you hold on, the clearer it becomes that control itself is another form of fear. Eventually, there's a quiet moment when the strings start to tighten and something deep inside begins to resist. You feel a whisper. This isn't freedom, it's repetition. And that small awareness might be the start of awakening. The moment the puppet senses the hands beneath and begins to wonder, what if I'm not the one moving? Soon you begin to see how deeply those invisible strings are tied within your mind, not by fate, but by design. You like to believe you're conscious of every thought and decision, but the truth is unsettling. By the time you think you've chosen, your brain has already decided. In studies, milliseconds before a person lifts their hand, brain activity spikes. The body acts before the mind catches up. Neuroscience calls this preconscious processing. Philosophy calls it destiny, written in neurons. The subconscious isn't an abstract idea. It's a living system, older than the reasoning mind. It lives within the brain's ancient structures, the limbic system, where emotions outweigh logic, and the basal ganglia, where repetition becomes habit. These parts don't think in words or plans. They speak through sensations, instincts, and impulses, the subtle push that tells you what feels safe or threatening. Every time you turn away from a stranger's stare or reach for the same coffee without thinking, it's your subconscious guiding you, repeating, protecting, remembering. Freud described it as an iceberg, a small visible tip above a vast mass of unseen influence. Jung went further, calling it the personal unconscious, a deep reservoir of forgotten memories and ancestral patterns that echo through dreams and coincidences. Modern psychology calls it automatic processing. But the essence remains the same. What you call personality is often a choreography of stored data, learned reactions, and sensory memories playing in loops. Your brain absorbs millions of impressions daily, but only a few reach awareness. The rest become the background rhythm of your life, shaping your fears, your trust, and your capacity to love. And even today, science can't fully measure what the heart already understands. No machine can capture how a mother's sigh defines safety for a lifetime, or why the scent of rain revives memories of someone you once tried to forget. The subconscious speaks in poetry, not equations. It reveals itself through dreams, slips of the tongue, and the quiet unease that surfaces when truth draws near. You are both the observer and the subject, studying your inner depths while being shaped by them. Knowledge helps, but it can only go so far. Understanding the subconscious is like trying to chart an ocean while standing on its surface. You may trace its currents and name its tides, but until you dive in, until you feel what moves within, you remain at the mercy of its silence. Knowledge alone is not power. Awareness is. To become aware is to enter a space where the mind stops pretending to lead and begins to listen. But what happens when the mind hides from itself? When everything buried begins to stir beneath the floorboards of your awareness? You may call it bad luck, self-sabotage, or coincidence. Yet the truth is quieter and deeper. It's the return of what you've refused to feel. The subconscious never forgets, it waits. Every unacknowledged fear and repressed emotion becomes part of the shadow that follows you, patiently shaping your choices until you finally confront it. You see it in repeating patterns. The person who falls for the same kind of partner, each one with a new face but the same ache. The man who fears rejection yet builds walls too high for anyone to reach him. The woman who craves peace but clings to chaos. These are not random events. They're emotional repetitions, attempts by the subconscious to resolve old wounds by recreating them. Psychology calls this repetition compulsion, the urge to relive pain until its lesson is understood. But the subconscious doesn't speak in words. It communicates through habits, cravings, and crises. Carl Jung called this inner space the shadow, the parts of yourself you've cast aside: anger, envy, vulnerability, need. Everything that didn't fit the version of you that others approved of. You learned early what was acceptable and buried the rest. But what's suppressed doesn't vanish. It transforms. It leaks out as emotional numbness, passive aggression, or sudden rage that feels misplaced. You may dream of drowning, of being chased, of losing teeth, all symbols pointing to the same truth. Something within you is trying to rise to the surface. Neuroscience echoes this idea. Repressed memories still activate the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm center. They linger like ghosts in your neural wiring, dormant until triggered. That's why a scent, a tone of voice, or a phrase can suddenly unravel you. You think you're reacting to the present, but you're actually reliving the past. The subconscious doesn't distinguish between memory and reality. It only knows survival. When you avoid your pain finds ways to face you, through anxiety without clear cause, through relationships that reflect your deepest insecurities, through the haunting feeling that you're repeating the same story again with different names. The subconscious becomes like a locked basement. Every door you seal rattles in the dark until opened. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The shadow is not evil. It is truth denied. It only turns monstrous when ignored. Facing it takes courage, to descend into yourself and meet the parts you've tried to live without. Because when you stop running from the dark, you realize it was never chasing you. It was guiding you home. Even the darkness has a purpose, to lead you back to wholeness. Have you ever questioned if your thoughts are truly your own? The shows you watch, the words you use, the dreams you pursue, how much did you choose, and how much was chosen for you by a world that never stops whispering? The subconscious doesn't exist in isolation. It breathes the culture around it. Every billboard, sermon, and trending phrase slips beneath awareness, rewriting your inner code one repetition at a time. You think you're deciding, but often you're remembering what the world taught you to want. Since childhood, invisible teachers have shaped you. Television defined beauty. Religion taught guilt. Language set the limits of what could be felt or said. Before you could define meaning, it was defined for you. Cognitive science shows that the brain learns through imitation and repetition. When society repeats a symbol long enough, the cross, the dollar sign, the flawless face, It becomes sacred in the subconscious, no longer questioned, only obeyed. You grow up chasing not truth but acceptance. Advertising understands this better than philosophy. It doesn't sell products, it sells identity. A car becomes status, a brand becomes validation. The subconscious, wired for emotional associations, absorbs these signals until desire feels like instinct. The mind learns to believe possession equals peace because it's been conditioned that way. You buy not from need, but from the learned belief that wanting is proof of existence. Then there are the inherited myths, ancestral fears passed down through generations, fear of rejection, of difference, of challenging authority. Society carries them like echoes, binding individuals into a shared dream. Psychologists call it the collective unconscious, the universal imagery and emotion moving through humanity like a hidden current. You can see it in politics, religion, and social movements, masses driven not by reason, but by shared emotion, mirroring one another like synchronized reflections. It feels safe to belong to the trance because isolation feels like death to the social mind. Even language becomes a boundary. The words available to you shape what you can think, what you can express, and even what you can feel. A society obsessed with productivity creates people who feel guilty for resting. A culture rooted in competition teaches you to measure your value through others' opinions. Gradually, your subconscious trades freedom for approval and names it morality. Yet true awakening doesn't begin with rebellion, it begins with recognition. To wake up isn't to resist the illusion, but to see it clearly. To understand that the voices shaping your thoughts were not meant to harm you, only to keep you safe within the familiar. But safety is not the same as freedom. Only when you see the pattern clearly can you ask the question that every system fears: what if I stopped obeying? There comes a moment when everything appears right from the outside: the job, the relationship, the routine of success. Yet something inside feels quietly off. You move through your days like an actor who's forgotten the story's purpose. The applause still comes, but it no longer holds meaning. Beneath all achievement lies a soft, constant hum, a question no success can silence. Why does this still feel empty? When you live cut off from your subconscious, you become distant from yourself. You keep achieving, performing, proving, but without a real connection to emotion. Every victory starts to feel hollow. Neuroscientists call this emotional dissonance, the gap between what you show and what you feel. You smile while your body protests. You agree while your nerves resist. This split leads to a kind of emotional paralysis. You function, but you no longer feel alive. You've seen it. The executive checking emails past midnight while his heart races. The woman who keeps falling for the same absence disguised as love. The artist who creates endlessly, yet can't face his own work. They all share the same wound, a life built on performance instead of presence. When the subconscious, the quiet keeper of truth, is buried, the conscious mind scrambles to fill the silence with noise. Psychologists call this fragmentation, a division between the part of you that feels and the part that denies it. Over time, this split breeds anxiety, burnout, and numbness. The brain, locked in survival mode, forgets how to rest. You begin to mistake tension for passion and exhaustion for purpose. Even love becomes mechanical, gestures without depth, words without soul. Yet the subconscious keeps signaling through recurring dreams, repeated mistakes, and relationships that collapse under familiar weight. You call it bad luck, not realizing it's a message seeking integration. Then one night, when the world finally stops demanding, the illusion cracks. You feel it, the quiet ache beneath all the noise. You realize you've mistaken stillness for weakness, numbness for strength, and survival for peace. This is the cost of disconnection, to build a life that impresses everyone except yourself. We call it adulthood, but often it's adaptation. We call it maturity, but it's just exhaustion wearing a mask. Somewhere along the way, you stopped seeking wholeness and started chasing approval. You forgot what it means to belong to yourself. But in that realization begins awakening, the first step toward return. Eventually, the inner war becomes too draining to sustain. You realize the mind you've been fighting was never your enemy. It was the neglected part of you waiting to be heard. The subconscious doesn't respond to control, only to attention. Healing starts when you stop forcing change and start listening to what it's been saying all along. It begins small. You sit in silence one morning. Instead of escaping into distractions, you let thoughts come, strange, messy, unfiltered. The worries, the memories, the pieces you thought you'd outgrown rise from within. You breathe and stay still. This is mindfulness, not the polished version from apps or retreats, but the raw act of witnessing your inner chaos without judgment. Neuroscience shows that observing thoughts without reacting quiets the brain's fear center, the amygdala. Awareness itself becomes the medicine. At night, your dreams return, unusual, symbolic. A locked door, a forgotten face, a familiar voice. You record them, realizing each one is a message from within. Psychology calls this integration, bridging the conscious and unconscious so your inner world feels whole again. You begin to speak to the younger self who learned to hide anger, who confused fear with obedience. At first it feels awkward, but something softens, a quiet recognition awakens. Working with the subconscious isn't about fixing what's broken, but remembering what's been silenced. You start small rituals, not with empty affirmations, but with genuine truths. I'm allowed to rest. I can be loved without performing. Over time, these words no longer feel foreign. The brain begins to rewire. New pathways form through repetition and emotional safety. Healing, neuroscience reminds us, is not an instant revelation. It's a gradual rewiring. Eventually, you stop trying to descend into the subconscious and allow yourself to dive. The deeper you go, the lighter you feel. What once felt like drowning becomes a return to the quiet intelligence within. The subconscious stops being a shadow to conquer and becomes a guide, a pulse leading you back to wholeness. The goal was never to silence your depths, but to listen deeply enough to rise, not as the version that survived, but as the one that remembers why. What if what you've been searching for has been looking through your own eyes all along? The subconscious isn't buried beneath you. It lives within every breath, hesitation, and unexplainable choice. It's the ocean beneath your ship, the night that reveals the stars. You've spent years trying to master it, never realizing it's the source of who you are. Close your eyes. Listen to the rhythm beneath your thoughts, the pulse of something ancient and alive. That isn't noise. It's memory. Every kindness, every wound, every silence you've endured moves through that space. Freud called it the unconscious. Jung called it the shadow. Both were naming the same mystery, the hidden architecture of being human. It's neither evil nor divine, but something in between, a mirror of everything forgotten. Alan Watts once said, "We are the universe observing itself, consciousness folded into form." To meet your subconscious is not to descend into darkness, but to return to your source. Each dream, impulse, and intuition is your deeper self speaking in symbols and emotion. Science can scan brain activity, map synapses, even predict your next move, but it cannot locate where fear turns into metaphor or where love takes its first form. That's the realm of mystery, where psychology meets the soul. You've spent years trying to control life, to think your way past pain. But maybe control was never the goal. Maybe awareness was. The subconscious doesn't need to be defeated. It needs to be understood. When you stop resisting it, you see it clearly. A mirror reflecting not the person you pretend to be, but who you've always been beneath the noise. You begin to see the mind not as light versus dark, but as a continuous rhythm, day turning to night, tides receding and returning. And maybe that's the deepest truth. The mind's greatest mystery isn't what it hides, but its endless longing to be whole. Every thought, emotion, and mistake is simply the psyche remembering itself. The subconscious is not your shadow, it's your map home. So next time you feel lost in thought, don't run. Pause. Look inward. Because what you'll find there isn't a stranger, but the self that has been waiting patiently for you to return.